Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for part 3 of our Universal Design series. Today, we are going to cover Universal Design and Equity in the Online Classroom. My name is Amy Julian. I'm the Director for the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support here at Illinois State University. And just a couple housekeeping items as we get started. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. You are able to engage through the question box or chat pane, however it is reflected on your device. And I encourage you to do so. We'd love to hear from our participants. I will be pausing for questions and have some time for interactivity and things as we move through. And then the recording from this webinar and all of the webinars in our series will be available online on the ICSPS website under the UDL resources. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So as we're entering here, I'm going to do it a little different this time. I'd like you to raise your hand or post in the chat box or question pane there. How well do you know UDL? Raise your hand if you are at a not at all, or you can post a 1 in the question box. 2 would be a somewhat. So how many 2s do I have out there? Go ahead and raise your hand. How well do you know UDL somewhat? All right. If we've had a training or 2, how does that look for the field? Raise your hand if you have had a training or 2, or post that in the question box. Number 3, I've had a training or 2. And number 4 would be write a book. Let's see where everybody is for today. How well do you know Universal Design for Learning? 1, not at all. 2, somewhat. 3, you've had a training or 2, or 4, you could write a book. Looks like we have individuals all over the spectrum, but you have quite a few 2s out there. So we're going to go with our 2s as we proceed forward. Thank you to those of you who participated. So Universal Design for Learning. This is the definition, and I always like to start with this so we know that we're all on the same page. And so UDL is the term used for defining scientifically valid framework for guiding educational practices that provides flexibility in the way information is presented, in the way students demonstrate knowledge and skills, and in the way students are engaged. And so we're going to talk about all those flexibilities. Again, today we're going to focus more on that online classroom, and then Thursday we're focusing more on the in-person classroom. We're going to talk about how to reduce barriers in instruction, provide appropriate accommodations, support, and challenges, and maintain high achievement expectations for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. So that is the term UDL, and that is how it is defined in both the Perkins Law and the Higher Education Act, and those are the 2 laws that you're going to find it in most readily over the last few months. So a couple things today, and you can do this with your class as well. So we're going to be demonstrating things that you can use as you move forward. So our online learning environment, what are those things that you have at your disposal? So you're able to self-regulate, you're able to act, and you're able to perceive. And so in self-regulation, you're able to sit anywhere you want. You guys could be sitting outside where I'm at. It's nice and sunny, and there's several farmers picking corn. Or you could stand or walk, be walking around. I could be joining you on a nature walk at the moment. You can eat. Maybe you're needing an afternoon snack at this time, or you could be fidgeting. You could be tapping your foot. So that's something that your online environment really allows you that sometimes your in-person environment does not. So we don't really allow our students to eat in class or be walking around in class very often. So that's something you can bring to their attention, that they're able to do that as long as they're able to pay attention. The act, how are we going to engage today? We do have an agenda. You do have that chat box. You're able to raise your hand. And then if you want to, you can doodle and take notes or anything of that nature. So I encourage you to do all those things. And those are all available in any online platform or classroom. And then perceived, sharing your screen. So I'm going to be sharing my screen with all of you, personal copies of the slides, and those are available with the recording that are also available on our website. And then closed captioning, and we're going to talk about the value of closed captioning as well. So what is our goal for today, and what are we going to cover over the next 45 minutes to half hour here? Our goal for this session is to explore how Universal Design for Learning can be implemented in an online classroom setting, And we're going to learn ways to enhance online curriculum and be more equity focused. So we'll talk a little bit about equity before we wrap up today. Sound like a fun hour long together? I think so. It's going to be great. All right, moving forward. We're going to do a little review here just in case some of you have not been joining us as we've been through our 3-part series, and we're in part 3 of part 4. We're going to talk about the 3 parts of the brain. When we look at UDL, we have 3 parts of the brain: the engagement, representation, and action and expression part. Engagement is the why, or the affective network. Representation is the what, or the recognition network. And action is the how, or the strategic network. Neuroscience tells us that the brain has 3 broad networks. And we look at those when we look at UDL. We have one for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. And so that's the ways in which we examine the brain through universal design. And that's the way we'll be examining the brain over the next few minutes together. So how do we design learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? That's our goal, right? The basis of UDL is make sure that we're equitable for everyone, and we look at the world through a UDL lens, gives us looking at the world through an equity lens. So how do we do that? We start by asking, what are the goals? What are the barriers? And then we infuse universal design for learning based on our learning goals. So the range and source of human variability in learning can be met by designing 3 principles addressing the brain's 3 broad networks. We design for multiple means for engagement in order to motivate the learner and sustain enthusiasm for learning by promoting various ways of engaging with material. Through that multiple means of representation, we have that network sense and perceive the information in the environment, and then we're able to transform it into usable knowledge. And then through multiple means of action and expression, we're able to allow the learner to demonstrate how to organize and initiate purposeful action in the environment. So we have really those multiple means, and let's talk about those a little bit more in depth. 3 principles for addressing the 3 broad networks: designing for multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. The range and source of human variability can be met by designing around these 3 areas. And so again, we're just going to go through this real quick. Core concept of UDL is that we have the architectural side, the neuro side, and the learning side. And then you engage in practice with sustained effort and persistence, and engagement in practice through optimizing relevance, value, and authenticity. So that's what we've talked about before. That's kind of a really quick, literally 2-minute refresher on the first 2 courses that we've covered. Now I want to move into the idea of equality, equity, and universal design. And when we look for equality, equality is everyone getting the same thing, right? We all know that everyone gets the same thing in equality, so everyone gets a box there. Equity is everyone getting what they need to be successful. So the goal is to see over the fence. And so in the equity box there, that middle box, you have the one gentleman who does not need a box, person in the middle who has just 1 box, and then the person at the end who needed 2 boxes to see. But when we look at universal design, we look at not necessarily the student, we look at the environment, and how can we design our curriculum to remove the barriers within the environment. And so that third is universal design. How do we look at the barrier being the environment? So we move that fence that they can't see through and make it something that is perceivable for all individuals. This is a handout that we shared on last Thursday, and it's multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action expression. This is CAST, nationally acclaimed work, and you're looking at the different ways around access, building, and internalizing different strengths and functions. So providing options for comprehension, providing options for perception, providing options for physical action. These are all things that you want to look at as you're looking at building out your curriculum. Again, the learner needs access to the curriculum. So how do you recruit interest, provide options for perception, provide options for physical activity? Learner needs to build understanding. How do you provide options for sustaining effort and persistence? Provide options for language and symbols. We talked a lot about that last Thursday. And then providing options for expression and communications, ways in which they can communicate what they have achieved and what they've learned. And then learner develops skills and practices. So providing options for self-regulation. We talked a little bit about that today. Providing options for comprehension. So activators supply background knowledge, share out resources for assignments, highlight patterns or critical features, big ideas, and relationships. Especially, I was a history nerd growing up, and I really loved looking at how you had relationships between functions in history and then actions that have taken place. And then provide options for executive functions, looking at guide appropriate goal setting, supporting planning and strategy development, and then facilitating management information and resources. All of that leads to the learner becoming an expert learner, which means learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and have strategic goals and direction. And again, if you're wanting more on the UDL framework, we did spend a lot of time on that last Thursday. Today, I am pivoting a little bit, and we're looking at what are we doing for online engagement to be both equitable and in the lens of universal design. So what we want to do is talk about equity for courses at a distance. And many of us, if not all of us, are currently teaching in an online environment. So all students need equitable access to digital and print materials and technologies used to deliver instruction remotely. COVID has turned our world upside down, and that is the analogy that I've used for the last 6 months now, and I think it still holds true. We are upside down from where we were before. When you look at the way in which we engage with students in January, February, and March, it's much different than how we engage with students now. And we need to be intentional about our thoughtful approaches that are needed to support students as learners within a new remote learning environment. So let's talk about ways in which we can do that. UDL on campus. Again, I've shared this resource a couple times. It is a phenomenal resource by CAST. It is a practical guide to help you look at course design, look at media materials, look at accessibility and policy, and it puts all that together. So if you're interested, I encourage you to check out that website. That's an additional resource that will be posted with the presentation to help you kind of build out your library around UDL. So let's look at things that we can do applying UDL to our classroom. And we talked about this on Thursday, so I'm going to go through this a little quickly because then I want to pivot to UDL online specifically. We're going to post our lesson plans and goals for the day. That's something that we know we have. We've done that for many, many years in curriculum development. Well, let's post those. Let's share this with our students. We're going to give assignment options under UDL. A UDL classroom has assignment options. It's not just everyone takes a test. It is giving options for the assignment. Flexible workspace. Things that we are really embracing in the online platform is that idea of flexible workspace because everyone is engaged in different places and shapes and areas. So flexible workspace is important to UDL. Regular feedback is something that we do, and we talked a lot about the idea of what regular feedback looks like and how do we engage through regular feedback. And I want to tell you that regular feedback is something that is really important not only for universal design, but it also is easy to do online. You have that chat function in your Zoom or in your Google Docs. You have that ability to really have a forum or discussion, and that really does enhance the students' digesting of the information. And then digital and audio text. Those are things that you can easily turn on in a lot of platforms to be able to have closed captioning or posting with closed captioning. So again, looking at universal design in your classroom, know your students' strengths and weaknesses, use digital material when possible. Sharing links is better than sharing a document to something that you have scanned in and posted up. So if you can share a link to a resource or a link to a PDF, that's going to be much more easy to digest, especially if the student does want to print it off at home. Share content in various ways. So how can they engage with the content, and how can they look at different ways to engage with that particular fact or that particular method that you're teaching that day? Offer choices for students on how to demonstrate their knowledge. This is a big part of universal design, is allowing students to show and demonstrate knowledge through multiple means. So multiple means of assessment is offering those students how to demonstrate their knowledge. Take advantage of your software supports. Talk with your IT people. I know many of you have had a lot of discussions on IT and how we're engaging with students. Google Classroom is used by a lot of you in the field right now, and that's a wonderful way to engage, but make sure we're polished up on our Google Classroom. Don't forget that low-tech options do still exist, and there's a lot of low-tech things that we can do to embrace universal design. And I want you to think about that for a little bit, because one of the things that we think about when we think about teaching right now, it's that it's just been all online, and that we're just moving into all of this, putting the information out and letting the students digest it. But think about those low-tech options that we have that they can do within their own home. So maybe look at things that they can do with no technology, or demonstrating activities and then sharing those back out with you. UDL is all about removing barriers, so sometimes low-tech options are the best options. And then learn from others, and that's why you're all here today. So I think that's a great example. So again, a lot of that we covered more in-depthly on Thursday. So I want to move into this whole idea of creating access, and creating access in an online environment. So I want to ask you, what are the barriers to online instruction? What are some of the barriers that you have encountered as you're moving through there? And I encourage you to put some of the barriers that you see in the chat, and I'm going to go through some of the top 8 that have come up out of the research that have come over the last 6 months, looking at what we're hearing from education are those barriers. So limited tech experience. Some online learners may be hesitant to leap into e-learning because they don't have the tech experience. And so how do we look at ways in which we can embrace and address those tech experience, or those learning gaps that we have? This is one of the most challenging hurdles that we're going to have to overcome, because it's a perception thing, and it's not something that you can just say, okay, you're all better now, look, your computer's working. It's a perception looking at that limited tech experience. One of the things you can do to alleviate that, though, is by offering them online tutorials, personalized support, creating online demos that show your students how to access and utilize your learning management system, whether that's a Google Classroom or whatever that might be, and then invite them to a new e-learning webinar where you'll talk them through the process. So be sure you're over-communicating in this era of online learning. Another barrier to instruction is past experience. And so past experience is something that you really, again, you can't have a lot of control over, but not everybody has a great past experience when we're talking about online learning. So which is why they are dreading it now. So in particularly true for online learners who have to endure boring compliance or online training courses, or something like just going through the motions, you'll really want to erase that past experience and focus on things you can do to help them, which takes us to that lack of motivation, right? So the lack of motivation, I'm guessing many of you have already encountered this in your classrooms. Anyone? Anybody raising their hand saying, yes, I've seen some lack of motivation in my students. But we need to be engaging for them. We need to be looking at the ways in which we are rewarding them for showing up. And there's a number of things that can contribute to lack of motivation, but there are ways to get your online learners involved and actively engage in the process. So you can look at badges, certificates, gamification. So making your curriculum engaging for them, polls, points, leaderboards, giving online learners the motivation they need to succeed. And you have those things that you've used in your classroom. So think of ways that you take those reward systems from your classroom and move them into the online platform. The next topic there is personal cognition. And this is the idea of how they really deal with the self-defeating beliefs and opinions that they have. So if they may feel as though they don't have the skills and abilities to enroll or to be successful in the course, this might prevent them from succeeding. And so again, the best way to overcome personal cognitions is the knowledge and how you're going to evaluate them. Let them know what is coming. Let them know what those assessments look like. And that's going to help them and support them as they succeed. Other barriers that we might see, again, I encourage you to post any barriers that you have to your online instruction right now into the chat there. But the next barrier is too challenging of e-learning materials. Several papers and several articles talked about how e-learning was perceived to be too challenging. And really, It's not that if it's perceived as too difficult, then it could be frustrating for your learners, for your students, and they might simply give up or stop showing up. One of the things we want to do is to give them a sense of accomplishment without making them struggle through the coursework. So back to that idea of badges and small successes or leaderboards to assist them in seeing that they're making progress. Another big barrier that's cited time and time again is that inadequate support. Some of your students may breeze through your program and others require additional help, and you want to be able to meet your students where they are. So looking at how to support them, maybe sending out a survey to see what they need at home. And we'll talk a little bit about where you are in your district, in your classroom. Are you a one-to-one technology school? Are you a BYOT school, bring your own technology school? Where are those things that we can help with? And then the lack of community involvement. And that's just something that is a nice way of saying we need our parents, right? Now more than ever, we really need our parents, our grandparents, our support systems at home to support our students. We can't stress enough how important it is to engage with that group as well as our students, and how we need to make sure that they understand what's happening in our e-learning environments as well as what's happening in the classroom. Any other barriers, any other comments you want to share? All right, seeing a couple people are just saying, yep, you touched on them. So thank you. I'm glad we covered those barriers for you. So how do we address the barriers? So we have these barriers, and I know I talked a little bit as we went through, but how do we address these barriers? We need to support our students in finding the tech they need, right? So if we have a student who is needing specific tech, how do we support that student in finding the tech they need? Look at it very similarly to how you would be addressing the barrier if they were in your classroom. What steps would you go through with your school to support those students, and look at those same steps. If you are a one-to-one tech school, maybe all of your students have Chromebooks or iPads or something like that. I think these gentlemen here look like they have iPads that they're looking at. So maybe they have that in place. Are they familiar with how to use it? Did we go over how to use it? And then a fun question, did we go over with the parents how to access that data and information? Did we show the parents how to assist their students and support their students when they're at home? Just something to think about. Is there free internet offered in your area? That is also a way that we can address that barrier of lack of access to technology. And one of the things that we've seen in the post-secondary level a lot is have hotspots in the parking lot. So we have had institutions that have set up hotspots in their parking lot, and that allows the students to come in and access Wi-Fi without having to come into the buildings. Now, as we're moving into phase 4 and hopefully phase 5 at some time in our future, we'll be able to have more students on campus. But through the summer, that was something with the summer programs that was really effective and also very important, especially in our rural areas. How do we get them connected with their Wi-Fi, with the technology, with the content of the class we're trying to teach? So my question for you is, what are you doing to support your students' tech needs in your school? I'd love to hear from some of you there. What are you doing to support your students' tech needs? Go ahead and post those in the question box. And I'm going to go ahead and keep moving us forward. So address the barriers, right? What can we do to address the barriers? Forget our past experience. This is a brave new world, and we are in unprecedented times. I think if I had $1 for every time we've said that over the last 6 months, I would be able to retire. So make your own roads. That's something that you also need to establish with your students as you're entering into and moving through, because I know with a lot of school districts, everything is very fluid. So I have an 8th grader who goes to school in person 2 days a week and is taught remotely 3 days a week. And then I have a 6th grader who goes to school in person 4 days a week and is taught remotely 1 day a week. Everything is very fluid. So forget the past experience. This is a whole new ball game. We're in this brave new world. We're in unprecedented times, and we're going to handle it to the best of our ability. And that's really a nice way to let everyone know that you're starting together. You're all starting and moving through this semester, and if we have to move into next semester, in this brave new world where we're going to make our own roads. Be the motivation for your students. They will feed off your energy. So I understand that that is challenging in an online environment, and it's sometimes challenging in an in-person environment. But I do challenge you to be the motivation for your students. Show up excited, show up ready for them, and they will then in turn show up ready to learn. They will feed off of your energy. And that is something that we've known as teachers for a long, long time. If we get excited about topics, they then get excited about topics and engagement. Third bullet there is really important. Be available to your students to answer questions and not just over email. We are struggling in our online environments, and maybe you're not. Maybe you're not struggling. Maybe you're just rocking out with your online environment. But a lot of times with instruction, we're struggling on how to connect with students. And I encourage you to turn on your computers, be available. We're going to talk about possibly setting office hours for your students where they can come on and ask questions, a Zoom office hour or a WebEx or a Google, whatever you feel like using. I'm not saying there's one better than the other, but be available to your students to answer questions. Create maybe an online learning community so they can support one another. A time where the class can get together under your supervision, of course, and chat and huddle and talk. Some of our students are not able to come in person at all and are not seeing their friends. So how can we help engage them with the curriculum, but also engaging them with each other? School is a social function and has been since its conception. Back when we're talking Dewey, and you want to be able to allow your students to engage. Any questions there? Any comments? So what can you do to make your classroom more accessible? What are some things you can do? We're going to pivot here for a second, talking about the barriers of online and looking at UDL and online, and we're going to talk about equity. So find out what your institutional policies and practices are around accessibility and accommodations as courses move online, and follow those. Seek those out. Share your learning objectives and goals with your students. This is one of the key, most important things that you can do, and you can do right away, is start sharing your goals for the day. Start sharing your goals for the week. Start sharing your goals for the curriculum. Because if you share your learning objectives, you're practicing UDL. Small changes make a big difference, right? We've been talking about that for a while now. So share your learning objectives and goals with your students. Inform yourself about where students can go for help, and share what information you have with your students early and often. And then things like, is there free Wi-Fi? Are you a one-to-one school? How do they access that information? How do they know those things? How do they know if you're not a one-to-one school? How do they know where to go if they do need technology? And then build your own and your students' best practices. As you move to embrace universal design, and as you move your courses online or in a hybrid model or in a face-to-face that's concerned that we might go online sometime soon, whatever you find yourself in that space, build your resources and share those with your students. Talk about ways in which you'll communicate. If you are in person, how will you communicate when you're virtual? Have those steps and discussions set up. If you're entirely online, do little things like showing your camera, sharing out information ahead of time. Talk about your learning objectives. All of those great ideas will not only increase your equity or impacts of equity, but also your implementation of universal design. Those two go hand in hand. Sound exciting? So let's pause for a second and talk about equality versus equity. And I really love this picture because equality is everyone getting the same thing, whereas equity is getting what you need for success. And this bike illustration is really nice in showing that. But I want to kind of take it a step further. So this is my equity shoe example because, well, I like shoes. So you guys get to come into my weird world of liking shoes. So today, all of you on the webinar, I'm going to send you out a free pair of shoes. Dun, dun, dun. Congratulations. You're going to get a pair of running shoes. They're all going to be size 8. and they're going to be red because that's the color that I've decided I like today. So who's excited about that? Who is excited that you are going to get a pair of size 8 running shoes? You can raise your hand if you're excited. I'm seeing no hands go up, so I'm guessing that either A, you don't like the color red, or you're not a size 8. Will they fit and meet your needs? So I want to talk about this for a second, because when you look at shoes, shoes are something that we need to customize, right? Shoes are something that you don't just, everybody gets the same size. Your feet are all different sizes. All of you on this webinar could be looking at your feet and you're like, yeah, I don't know if everyone else on this webinar has the same size feet. So you have different sizes. You also have performance issues, style that you want. Maybe you don't feel like wearing red right now. It's October. Maybe you're more of an orange kind of person. Comfort. So those are all variables that you should consider when you want to be equitable, right? We talked about this the first time we got together when it came to setting your table for success and talking about a meal plan and how if you serve the same thing, you're going to be inconsiderate of those who might have dietary restrictions. But it's the same thing if if I turn into Oprah and I'm giving you all a free pair of running shoes, if I give you all a size 8, which is my size, is that really what's going to work for you? Is that really getting you, back to this point, getting you to equity, getting you to what you need to succeed? And I don't think it is. I think what we need to do is be able to think about performance, style, size, and comfort, and be sure that everyone gets what they need to succeed. And it's the same thing when we're looking at our online classrooms and when we're looking at the way in which we engage with our students. Giving them all the same thing is not going to work. We want to meet those students where they are and make sure that we're considering their performance, their style, their size, and their comfort as they engage with our online curriculum. So let's look at equity in practice. So an example of equality. All students in an EMT 101 class will take their test at the same time in the same room on the same day. Sounds delightful, doesn't it? Sounds good. Everybody gets the same thing. They have the same test in the same room on the same day. We're all good. If you look at that through an equity lens, though, you consider that some of the students might need accommodations to be successful on their test, such as extra time, a quiet testing area, maybe I need larger print. So understand that variability is the norm, and we know that from universal design. We've been talking that since the 90s, but now we need to look at how that implements into an online curriculum, how that implements into our classroom or whatever circumstance we find ourselves in now. So it's something to think about. Many of you are using videos in your instruction, and videos are a powerful medium for conveying information. They're fantastic. And I do agree that videos are great. I would encourage you, and we talked about this significantly on the first webinar, looking at how to transcript and make sure you have captions and make the content of the video accessible for all students. Also considering if it is an online instruction, many of you are having asynchronous instruction, so you're not necessarily engaging with the students at that exact time that they're logging on. You're doing recordings of sessions, and those students are watching them at a variety of times. And so you want to be sure, A, that they're captioned accurately, and you can do that on YouTube, but also that you are engaging with them in different ways, so maybe they can comment whenever they are available, maybe leaving that comment time or that test-taking time a little bit more broad. I'm big on what you can do today. So things that we can do that we talked about. Turn on your camera. Your students want to see you. Yes, they do. I'm not kidding. Your students want to see you. So turn on your camera, engage with your students. Also, have your students turn on their cameras. Now, depending on the grade level you teach, this is going to be easier or harder, but sometimes it's going to be fantastic. So have them turn on their cameras and engage with your students. If they are in the middle school level, it's a little bit different. Once you get to about 8th grade through high school, you're going to see a lot of enthusiasm and joy in their faces, or maybe not. Maybe you're going to see, being a little sarcastic, I have a high schooler, you're going to see that ugh look, but it's good. Have them turn on their camera. Have them notice each other and notice you. Be available to your students. This is really important, and I can't stress enough the importance of saying, I'm going to have a Zoom hour at this time, and I'm going to be able to answer your questions at this time. I'm going to demonstrate what I need you to do. Use those whiteboards. Demonstrate that information. Establish online office hours, again, to assist your students. I got ahead of myself. Demonstrate, use that whiteboard. Use closed captioning. Share your learning objectives and goals. I've said that probably 10 times already in our afternoon together, but really, please consider sharing your learning objectives and goals with your students. That's going to help them understand what they're being assessed on and help you get better productivity out of your students. And then check your tech, because every time you have technology, something could go wrong or incorrect. So check your tech and make sure your tech is working. And then always have a backup plan, because sometimes tech works and sometimes it doesn't. Resources that I'd like to share with you today. There are a ton of free UDL resources and tips at castprofessionallearning.org. Check those out. It's a great resource. And then the other two, one is an institution that's fully engaged with universal design, and they talk about how they did that, which is phenomenal, and it's a great video to watch. It's about 10 minutes. And then the other is a resource, and I understand that it does say 2006, but it really is a nice way to reflect on principles for universal design and how they were implemented, and it is still applicable today. So some additional implementation tips when you're looking at UDL in your online classroom. Universal design strategy implementation are front-loaded. Do this not as a retroactive thing, do this as a front-loading. Be sure that you're thinking about universal design as you go into writing your curriculum. Think about universal design as you reflect on your curriculum. But trying to do it, initiating it on the fly might lead to some hiccups, so I encourage you to front load your implementation. Look at multiple means of engagement. How are you engaging with your students? Are you asking them to put things on the chat? Are you asking them to raise their hands? Are you asking them to turn on their cameras? Are you asking them to use that flip chart or that flip grid? Are they using TikTok or something like that to share videos, or YouTube? Multiple means of engagement for your students and multiple means of assessment for your students. Not just one test, not the comprehensive exam that happens December 19th for everything that they've learned since August. Really look at ways in which we can do multiple means of assessment and how that looks. You can either do a project or you can do a play. If you do a project, you can have it be a song. You can write out a poem. You can share your resources in different ways. Maybe it's a video. Maybe they get up and ask it out. One of the assignments that I had, and I've used many, many times, is they had to do an end-of project on demonstrating these principles that we learned throughout the course of the semester, and we were about halfway through, so around midterm, and they were able to do anything as long as it achieved the goal of demonstrating their knowledge. And they had to present it. It had to be a presentation. So I had students who walked up and put in, I'm going to age myself, put in a CD or went to their YouTube page and showed, here's our presentation. I had students that used PowerPoint or students that used Prezi. I had students that acted out a full act from a play. I had students who developed a song that they wrote that had very nice, catchy little lyrics to it, but that explained all the principles that they were going over and how they work together. So multiple means of assessment, allowing the students to have ownership in their education. And that's really what universal design talks about and underlines as well, is if we share our goals and we share our objectives with the students, and then we give them multiple means of engagement and multiple means of assessment, they're allowed to have ownership in their educational experience. So a couple things I'd like you to consider when applying UDL to your classroom. Ensure the flexibility of your learning environment and share with them that they have flexibility in their learning environment. Show them what it is. Explain to them why it's beneficial. Talk about all those wonderful things. Establish clear learning goals. Okay, I'm on like 15 times on that one. Determine the types of content that best support their learning and share those content types with your students. One thing that if you look at universal design, you're talking about considering together all the assessment types. So allowing the students, again, to have that option to have that conversation about how we're going to assess how we learn the Pythagorean theorem, how we learn how to change the oil on a tractor, how we learn the growth cycle of a chicken or the reproductive cycle of a dog. How do we learn those things? Let's talk about the assessments together as a class and agree on the purpose of feedback and grades. Let them know when you're going to comment. Let them know what they can expect those comments, when they can expect those comments to come, and then also let them know what those grades mean. If you're an instructor that does not believe, or you're a teacher that does not believe that an A is given to everyone who completes the work, A's are only given at this level, they need to know that. What do your grades mean when they earn a grade in your class? And help them understand that and work with them to define that. All the things we talked about today are on this website. All the recordings from part 1 and part 2 are on this website here. It is our ICSPS website, CTE Universal Design for Learning. There's all kinds of great resources there, so I do encourage you to take a minute and look at those. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you is this is my contact information. That's my email, that's my website. And if you have any questions, go ahead and post those in the question box. We are at part 3 of a 4-part series on universal design. So we started off with an introduction to universal design. We looked at what are some strategies for your classroom for universal design. Today was really online. How do we infuse equity and universal design online? What are those barriers that we encounter online and how do we address those barriers? And then on Thursday is our final capstone, and we are going to look at how it looks in your in-person classroom. So with that, any other questions, comments, or concerns? I'll stay on for a minute so you can post those questions in the question box. If not, please use me as a resource. We are here to help. So if you have any questions about universal design or implementing that in your classroom, there's my email. I'm on a lot of times, so just shoot me an email. I promise I will get back to you, and let me know what questions you have and what we can do to support you at ICSPS. And with that, I thank you for your time today and have a great afternoon.